Hello everyone, welcome back to our YouTube channel. We are PGN Accounting Group, and today we're going to be talking about inflation. Why should I care about inflation? I'm sure you guys are sick and tired of hearing about inflation, but we wanted to update those that maybe it's a little over our head, or we keep hearing about certain people in certain terms and we're not really sure what's going on. And we just keep hearing high inflation and we see high prices, and we really want to know what's going on. This video is for you. But before we get into the video, please hit the subscribe button, follow us on Instagram, and if you want to book an appointment with us or your free initial consultation, please visit us at pgnaccounting.com. Now back into the video about why you should care about inflation. What is inflation? So what it is that it measures the rate of rising prices of goods and services. So as you can tell, eggs are astronomically high. That's due to inflation. So as those prices are going, inflation is actually higher. There's also something called deflation, where prices are over time decreasing. But a healthy economy is more inflationary, which means prices of goods are rising over the years. You do not want to be in a perpetual deflationary environment, because that means that the prices of goods and services are going down, which means people's wages are going down. Historically, we've been averaging about 3.8% inflation over the last 60 years. And over the last 5 years, it's been 1.8% in 2019, 1.2% in 2020. So about half of the normal, or even a third of the normal inflation that we've been seeing the last 60 years. But then we obviously know what happened in 2020. Inflation went up to 4.7% in 2021. Now that's not terrible. That's only 0.9% above the average. But oh boy, 2022, and we got hit with 8% inflation, and that was a doozy, and it really brought the stock market down. Real estate prices started to kind of settle down, but then it started coming down a little bit. In January of 2023, by the time this video comes out, we'll have heard what February's inflation is. Sorry I couldn't update that, but we at least know what January was, 6.4%. So it's a good sign that things are kind of starting to not be as high for inflation as it used to be. I would say that these inflation numbers are actually lower than what true inflation is. Actual inflation in 2022 was probably more towards 13 to 15%. Anybody that actually goes shopping for groceries or traveling or pays for gas, you'll see that prices definitely increased more than 8%. So this is what it's called CPI, Consumer Price Index. That calculation is a little biased and skewed, but that is what the government tells us. And if they tell us we got 8% in 2022, it's most likely higher because they don't want to really scare people, which I'm not trying to scare you, but I also don't want to live in la la land and think it's 8% when it's really 12 to 15%. Same thing with January. If they say 6.4, it might actually be higher. Sometimes they skew their calculations to make it look a little bit better than it really is. So that's what inflation is. If you haven't heard of a wage or a price spiral, usually what it means is anywhere that you start on here. So let's say general prices, they rise. That's where we are. We're in inflation. That leads to workers wanting higher wages, which we've been seeing that, where the minimum wage keeps growing. Now it's about $15 in some places per hour. Then that leads to higher labor demand. And then that leads to higher wages, which then leads to companies passing higher labor costs to the consumers. Yippee. So all those people that want $15 per hour to go push carts or scan groceries at Walmart, we have to pay that through higher prices of eggs or higher prices of other groceries or gas or utilities or you name it. Companies do not want to just eat the cost of paying their employees $15 per hour. They're going to pass that cost down to us because they have to maintain their profit. All of those that want higher wages, I'm all right there for you earning more. But we should be aware of what the effects of higher wages means. It usually means over time, higher prices. And it just keeps going in circle and circle and circle. Unfortunately, though, in 2022, inflation was 8%, which means that the prices and the wages increased a lot more than the historical average. Why is there high inflation now? Again, there's so many factors we're not going to talk about in this video, so I do not want people to think I'm being ignorant or purposefully ignoring certain things. It's just out of the scope of this video. I can only talk so much in a 15 to 20 minute video, maybe a little bit longer, because there is a lot to talk about. Some of the major components of high inflation lately has been that normally it's been such low interest rates for such a long time that we're not used to these rates. We're not used to this inflation. We're used to inflation being about 1% to 2% and interest rates being around 2% to 3%. We've been spoiled over the last 10, 15 years. We don't understand what it means to have high inflation like it was in the 80s, which I'm going to show you. High inflation is also very relative because we've had very low inflation and low interest rates for a long time. Another huge contribution was what happened in 2020 caused $5 trillion of stimulus spending in 2021. Yes, 5 trillion with a capital T in PPP loans, stimulus checks, large child tax credits, you name it. They put stimulus money into the economy for people to spend. And rightfully so, because they shut down the entire economy. So people needed to make money somehow, and these companies were starving because nobody was spending money. But now we have to face the consequences of our actions of $5 trillion being pumped into the economy. And what is that consequence? High inflation. So what is the federal funds rate? It is an interest rate set by the Federal Reserve, which I'm sure you guys are all hearing about. Federal fund rates, interest rates being set, Federal Reserve. Again, I can't talk about everything, but I could talk a little bit so that you guys at least know what's going on in the news when you hear and see this guy. So the interest rate is set by the Federal Reserve, and it's to indirectly manage interest rates, inflation, unemployment. They haven't really done a great job of that, but they're really trying to crack down on this high inflation by increasing the interest rates substantially over a short period of time. And it looks like it's working because, as you saw, inflation went from 8% down to 6.4% in January 2023. So once the February comes out, we'll see if it's continuing to work and if the Federal Reserve needs to increase rates more and consistently over the next few months or even the course of the rest of the year. More specifically, the federal funds rate is set by the Federal Open Markets Committee, FOMC. It's comprised of a group of 12 members across the U.S., their regional Federal Reserves across the U.S. They meet on a monthly basis, sometimes a little bit more often, but the head of this committee and the chair of the Federal Reserve is Jerome Powell. And the reason why we see and hear this guy regularly in the news is because he's the spokesperson of the FOMC and Federal Reserve. So after they meet, after they make a decision, he's the person that gets up on the podium and he is the face of the Federal Reserve. So that is who we see all the time. And that's why we hear Jerome Powell's name consistently, because we've been facing high inflation for over a year now. And as you can see, this is what the federal funds effective rate has been over the last 70 years. So from 1955 to 2023 now, as you could see over all of these years, We've been around 2.5% on this line right here. So we're a little bit above that now. These gray shaded marks are recessions that happen. So there was recessions in the late 50s, 60s, 70s, mid 70s, a couple in the 80s. There was early 90s, 2001, 2002. Very known Great Depression in 2008, 2009. That mini one over here in 2020. Very skinny, very short-lived because the $5 trillion really stimulated the economy, but now we're facing the consequences. But as I said, we've been facing very low interest rates for a long time. They were almost at zero for 15 years. Look at that. You can't even see it. It's almost lined up with zero from 2009 to 2016. It was almost at 0%. That skews our perception of what high interest rates are. Right now, we're about 5, a little over 5, or just under 5. That is astronomically insane compared to 0 or 1% that it used to be, that we're very used to. But it's nothing compared to the 80s when it was almost at 20% interest rate. So we need to, calm our horses a little bit and not start having this fear-mongering mindset that interest rates are astronomically high, because if you look at the last 75 years, it's really not. And we should, again, plan accordingly. So what are the effects of inflation and the federal funds rate? The Federal Reserve is aiming for about 2% inflation, which they successfully have been for a while, but they're kind of behind, and they were caught, blindsided by this 8% inflation that is now about 6 to 7% inflation. So they are bringing it down. I don't know if it's them or their efforts that are bringing it down, but inflation is coming down. Raised Fed funds rate dramatically discourages spending to hopefully decrease inflation. So when the $5 trillion of stimulus spending that was pumped into the economies to encourage spending, that raised inflation to about 8% because so much money was pumped into the economy to encourage people to spend. So if people are spending and spending and spending, inflation's going to go higher because they have more cash available to spend for goods. And when the goods are in demand, demand increases prices. And when there's such a low supply and such a high demand, prices go even higher, and they just keep going higher and higher. And then we're seeing 8% inflation rates. So what the Fed is trying to do is, hey, don't spend so much money. We're going to increase these interest rates, which is in turn going to make mortgages more expensive, cars more expensive, and people are not going to take out loans to spend money because the loans are so costly per month. So over time, they are discouraged to spend, and hopefully that lack of spending is actually decreasing inflation, which it looks like it's working. So there is a correlation between increased Fed funds rate and the increased interest rates on mortgages, student loans, auto loans, and credit cards, etc. So anything that has an interest rate, it is directly correlated to the Fed funds rate. That includes even your savings account, your high yield savings account. 5 years ago, you were barely earning any interest on it. But now that interest rates are a lot higher, you're actually earning a good 3 to 4%. So those increased in interest rates on mortgages results in lower house prices. So inflation on at least the housing sector is decreasing because prices are decreasing. So it's kind of a deflationary environment. Again, there's a lot more factors than just the Fed funds rate and the inflation rate. But for the most part, it looks like it's working. So as inflation is higher, the Federal Reserve feels the need to increase rates to bring down inflation, which is bringing up and making your monthly payments larger. So it's really strapping you for cash every single month because your monthly payments are higher, so you can't put as much into savings, or you don't have so much discretionary money to go spend on groceries or entertainment or traveling, because you're just trying to keep up with your monthly payments. Sometimes it causes recessions. As you saw, those shaded parts are a little bit correlated with high interest rates, or at least increased interest rates. They tend to stop right when a recession is and then decrease because they're trying to stimulate the economy and get out of a recession. I would say that's directly correlated. Also, unemployment usually increases for the same exact reason as federal funds rate are increasing. They're bringing down inflation, causes a recession. A recession also means unemployment goes up because companies can't afford all these workers anymore. So they fire and lay off a lot of people, unfortunately. So the unemployment increases. So everything looks to be directly correlated. And I've compared both charts here. This is the unemployment rate up here, and this is the federal funds rate that we showed before, but now it's side by side. You can tell as interest rates go up, then unemployment finally goes up, and then they decrease fund rates, the federal fund rate, because they're trying to stimulate the economy, and then unemployment starts to go down again. This was dramatically seen in 2008 and 2009, and also in 2020, where unemployment was at record lows almost. We're about 3.8% now, but it was at 5%, 4.6% right at 2008, 2007. And they were increasing the rates up until then, until they paused, and then recession hit, unemployment went up, and then they dramatically decreased the rates down to zero to try getting out of a recession, trying to stimulate the economy, which they did, but it took a long time to get that unemployment back down to record lows again. And then 2020 happened and it shot up to almost 15%. And during those 2015 to 2020 period, they were actually increasing rates again, and we hit a recession. And then to stimulate the economy, they decreased rates back down to zero, which it was at for a while, and unemployment dramatically decreased. I would say, one, because of interest rates, and number two, because of the $5 trillion of stimulus spending that they put into the economy, really rejuvenated the economy and the job market. But as you could tell, unemployment rate is still very low. It didn't spike back up yet, but interest rates have been. So anytime now, I think unemployment is going to raise. We're going to enter into a recession. Nobody knows when. I don't know when. If I did, I'd be a multi-billionaire. But nobody knows when it's going to happen. In my opinion, I think it's going to happen within the next year, maybe year and a half. Unfortunately, people are going to lose their jobs. Unemployment's going to increase. I don't know when it's going to happen, but plan for it. Increase your savings. Reduce your expenses. Budget properly. Be more competitive in the workspace so that when layoffs are happening, they don't want to lay off you because you're such a valuable worker. And if they do, you have a nice nest egg of savings to rely on. But it is directly correlated between unemployment, the Fed funds rate, recession. And here's an example, a very realistic example of how interest rates affect you and why you should care about this. It might be a little bit hard to see, but I took a $350,000 home price, 5% down payment. Property taxes are about $4,400. Insurance is about $1,200 per year. Since it's not the 20% down payment, you're going to have PMI. And if this was 2 years ago when rates were almost at zero for the federal funds rate, which means mortgage rates are very low, about the 2 to 3%. So let's say interest rate was at 3.5% with this home price and mortgage of 30 years. Your rate, your total monthly payment was $2,200. Now, interest rates are about 7.25% for a 30-year mortgage. Every single factor is the exact same other than your interest rate increased by 3.75%, from 3.5% all the way up to 7.25%. Nothing else changed except your interest rate. Now you're paying $2,977 per month. That is an increase of $775 per month in just interest. Nothing else increased. You're not paying down the mortgage more. You're not paying more in property taxes. You're not paying more in insurance. You're just paying more in interest, which is money down the drain, and I hate that. But you can't do anything about this interest rate environment that we're in, that the interest rates are so high. So what does that mean? That means $775 a month is not going towards groceries, towards traveling, towards a new car, towards other entertainment or discretionary payments like clothing or jewelry or a dining out or something for fun. So that is decreasing spending, which is going to be decreasing inflation over time, unfortunately. And as interest rates go up, home prices might go down, because who can pay an extra $775 per month on the exact same home? They can't. So in theory, home prices should be coming down, but I don't have a crystal ball, and there's a lot more factors to take into account, like supply and demand, rather than just interest rates. But I wanted to show you guys how effective high interest rates are on your monthly obligation for a mortgage. It affects it so much that we should care about this. You should not ignore this. And that's where I say, that's where you ask, why should I care? It's because inflation affects every aspect of your life. You should understand what is going on. It affects your home buying, your spending, your fun spending, your auto loan, how much you can afford. If you can't even afford that car, your student loans. It affects every aspect of every single person's life. And even if you don't have loans, it affects how much eggs cost, how much your groceries cost, how much your utilities cost, how much your rent costs. Everything is affected by inflation and the Fed funds rate. So you should understand, you should care about what is going on and what is inflation, because it also helps you plan for your future. If you know interest rates are going to be a lot and your monthly obligation for a 30-year mortgage is going to be more than it used to be, then that means you have to plan for a bigger down payment, or you have to plan and get a new job that pays more so that you can afford it. Or maybe pay off a car with cash instead of going on a 60, 72-month loan, because the interest rates on car loans could be as high as 10, 15%, depending on your credit score. So it helps you also plan for your future if you care about inflation and you start to understand what is going on. And please keep up with the news. I know sometimes it's boring, but it's good to just go on Yahoo News or Google News or CNBC and just get the summary of what's going on the day. You don't have to listen to the news for over an hour or read every single article, but read an article here and there, 5-10 minutes, just so you know what's going on in this inflationary market, what's happening with the stock market, the housing market, people's jobs, pricing for goods and services. You guys should keep up with what's going on in the news, because it affects every single one of us and every single aspect of our life. Thank you for tuning in all the way until the end of this video. Please hit the subscribe button, follow us on Instagram, especially if you appreciated our content and this background about why you should care about inflation and about interest rates. We hope that you took something out of this video, and if you did, hit the subscribe button, follow us, share it with your friends and family. And if you need to book an appointment with us, go to pgnaccounting.com to book your appointment or your free initial consultation. But until next time, have a great time, and we appreciate you watching our videos. Take care and bye-bye.